Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to this April 10, 2014 edition of Nightcast. The ongoing saga of the missing MH370 continues in the daily news. Specialists are preparing the submarine, which will be used when the general location of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 is identified. William O'Halloran, Director of Marine Operations at Bluefin Robotics, which manufactured the submarine, said the vehicle will scan an area using sonar technology and return objects of interest. A plane searching for the missing aircraft has detected a possible new signal in the southern Indian Oceans, Australian officials say, as of today. And yet, there's also other stories, friends, that say that could be a man-made signal. Nonetheless, we have this report to open our stories tonight.
One of the great things about it is that it can work at the extreme operational environment, the great depths that we're expected to have to survey, and that allows us to put the vehicle down, map the area, and return objects of interest. What it does is it scans using a side scan sonar, so it looks to each side of the vehicle, approximately 500 meters aside, and then in that it is able to return what we call objects of interest. To conduct surveys and searches in the subsea world, things move at about 3 nautical miles per hour, not very fast. So to get the information that we need to solve these mysteries and others, it's going to take time, and it's going to take the technology to be put to work.
Okay, so that's a new submarine that will be put underwater and scan at a rate of about 3 miles per hour and try to see if somebody can figure out where that missing MH370 is located. Friends, related to the Ukraine, Putin warns Europe of gas shortages over Ukraine debts.
Around 15% of all Europe's gas supplies flow from Russia through pipelines in Ukraine. Some countries in Eastern Europe are almost entirely reliant on Russian gas, while the largest volumes go to the industrial powerhouses of Italy and Germany. Now, President Putin has written to leaders of countries in Eastern and Western Europe, expressing his extreme concern that their supplies could be affected because of the more than $2 billion Ukraine owes for Russian gas. He has called for urgent discussions on how to resolve the crisis, but there's a clear threat that Russia may turn off the taps. In Berlin, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister warned that a gas crisis would harm Europe more than Russia.
It will force us to find new markets. It will force Europeans to invest in new infrastructure to buy gas from the United States and other parts of the world. You will pay for this more. It will mean that the consumers will pay more. But Russian gas will be consumed by someone else in other the regions of the world.
With another gas war looming, President Putin was meeting political supporters at his dacha outside Moscow. He told them that he decided to press ahead with trying to annex Crimea last month after conducting a secret opinion poll, which he said showed 80% of Crimeans were in favour.
We made the decisions after it became clear what the mood of the people was. We didn't prepare for what happened. To be frank, we could have imagined what the feelings were, but we didn't know for sure. Only after we conducted first opinion polls, which we conducted secretly, only then was it clear that we made the right decision.
The diplomatic fallout of that decision continued today, as the parliament linked to the human rights organisation the Council of Europe, of which Russia is a member, suspended its voting rights. The Russian delegation left in protest, describing the proceedings in Strasbourg as a farce. Daniel Sanford, BBC News, Moscow.
Thank you, Daniel. Friends, let me tell you where we'll be going with the rest of the evening. Later tonight, we'll have an earthquake map that will show you a couple of large earthquakes that occurred today. Excuse me, I didn't mean to make an earthquake in our studio here by ramming the desk with my chair. And we'll also, at the end of tonight's program, we'll show you some of the recent travels of the royal couple of the UK. And I'll show you a scripture tonight that goes back to the time of ancient Israel and the elders of ancient Israel when they came forward to Samuel and asked Samuel, or told Samuel, you're old, your sons, they hadn't had much experience. We want a king like the rest of the nations. Make us a king, which was the beginning of the kingship and the royalty that we see out of Great Britain today, the UK. And I'll say more on that and have the scriptures on the screen for you when we get to that story. I want to go next, though, to a story related to Japan and Australia. They've agreed on a trade deal, and even though in this video you'll hear, this trade deal sounds like something very wonderful. After this video, I'll show you another one and show you how not only, friends, have we been announcing here night after night, from time to time, we've been announcing since last year, how the United States is in now the worst drought ever. Before last year, we were saying it was the worst drought in over half a century, the worst drought since 1956. As of a year ago, the records began to show we are in the worst drought ever in the United States. Other countries came through with reports of how they're in great drought situations. After this video, I'll show you a video that shows you how Australia, in spite of their Prime Minister Tony Abbott and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe confirming a basic agreement that you'll see about in this video, aiming to their signing a deal soon that'll have numerous benefits for the two countries, including, and for Australia, including the price of imported Japanese cars in Australia and a boost to exports to Australian beef to Japan. Right after this video, then we'll show you how Australia is having their worst ever drought. But first this.
It certainly is good for Australia. It's always hard to quantify these things, but I think the bottom line is that Australian farmers, particularly beef producers, can export more product to Japan, and of course Australian consumers get the advantage of cheaper Japanese cars. Then you have to say that's good for Australian industry and also good for Australian consumers.
So in terms of numbers and cents, Shane, when will Australians start feeling the benefits of this free trade agreement?
Well, in terms of car prices, they should start to come down fairly immediately whenever that's introduced, which I think is straight away. So if you're buying a $30,000, that's Australian dollars, Japanese car, that should fall by around $1,500. So there's quite a saving there, I think, for Australian consumers in this. So my feeling is that the economic benefit should start to become apparent fairly soon. I'm not going to revise up my economic growth forecast for Australia, but I think this has to be seen as a positive.
All right, you have the FTA with Japan, and Prime Minister Abbott is heading for South Korea to sign a deal there with the Koreans. Do you think that these free trade agreements will help fill the gap left by the mining boom?
They will certainly help. There's no doubt that Australia got a huge boost over the last few years as mining investment boomed. That's now coming down as quickly as it went up, and we need other sectors of the economy to help out. Obviously, agriculture is a big part of that, and the free trade deals certainly help on that front. And that combines with a recovery we're seeing in the Australian housing and consumer sectors, I think, to help fill the gap left as the mining boom slows down. So the Australian economy, I think, should come out of this in reasonably good shape with these sorts of initiatives.
And how does this bilateral FTA with both the Koreans and the Japanese impact the Trans-Pacific Partnership being sponsored by the U.S.?
Well, of course, there's all sorts of deals going on in various forums. And, of course, at the wider level, there's the ongoing negotiations with the World Trade Organization. So these things do have an impact on that. And I would expect that if agreements are reached in the Trans-Pacific Forum, then these sorts of deals ultimately get folded into that to some degree. But I think the bottom line, always multilateral agreements are probably the best one, but bilateral agreements are a good second best. And having Australia do this with several countries in the region, Korea, Japan, and of course focusing on China going forward, that's certainly a good move.
Friends, I should have told you that was Shane Oliver, chief economist from AMP Capital, explaining to Rico Hazan some of the advantages of the deal that is being struck between Australia and Japan. In this next video, though, we're going to show you how the Australian drought that has hit the farmers and their cattle hard is causing them to have to sell off a lot of their cattle. And even though emergency relief is on its way to drought-hit farmers, that relief in eastern Australia, that relief is only financial relief. Many of these farmers are still forced to sell off their cattle, and the drought is not only inflicting a financial toll, there's a mounting psychological cost as well on communities where once fertile land is turned to dust, and there's little relief in that way in sight. This video, includes scenes that my headnotes say some viewers may find upsetting. From Tamsworth in New South Wales, Phil Mercer reports.
They pray for rain in these parts. This is traditionally some of Australia's best farming country, but much of the land is barren. The drought 400 kilometres north of Sydney is the worst in living memory. Many waterholes are dry, crops have failed, and livestock sold off to make ends meet. For many farmers, life is a struggle. When times were good, how much water would be in this reservoir?
Oh, look, in normal times, this would be 3/4 full to full, and that'd be up here. People just can't find or see a way forward, and of course they become very depressed, and as we know, some people take it that next step, the final step, which is really, really sad.
It's been more than a year since this parched corner of eastern Australia had significant rainfall. The ground is turning to dust. Once upon a time, this dam would have been full of water. As debt and depression mount, there is still hope, however, that the drought will be short-lived. But for some on the land, they do wonder just how long they can survive. To keep their land viable, many farmers are being forced to sell their prized cattle. In the New South Wales city of Armidale, the sale yard has been awash with livestock.
Very depressed. There was no restocking interest, meaning there are no people buying stock to put back on their properties. If the cattle were not good enough to go to an abattoir or a feedlot, then the price was very low.
The big dry shows no sign of easing its grip. Not much rain is forecast for autumn, but the fight to survive continues. Near the village of Currabubula, Richard Chayman has sold 1/4 of his Angus beef herd as the financial effects of the drought intensify.
30% of the income gone from those for the year. So I've got to try and make that up in the next 12 months or so, and the way things are looking, I don't see how we're going to be able to do that. It's a real concern. You get to my age and you worry about where you're going to go in the future. You've worked hard, and what are you going to do?
Drought relief worth more than $285 million has been approved by the Australian government. This is a country that's well used to nature's extremes, but this drought is testing the community like never before. Phil Mercer, BBC News, near Tamworth in New South Wales.
Friends, before we go to today's earthquake report and what's happening with the travels of the Duke and Duchess of the UK and little potential future King George, let's take a look at what's happening today in Egypt, where 3 Al-Jazeera journalists have denounced as a joke the latest hearing in their trial on terrorism charges in Egypt.
Behind the high walls of the Torah prison complex, Another day in court for the Al-Jazeera journalists. This time, no cameras were allowed in. We filmed these images at a previous hearing. The award-winning Australian correspondent, Peter Gresta, is followed by his colleagues Mohammed Fahmy and Beher Mohammed. Their imprisonment has caused an international outcry. The Al Jazeera team are accused of having links to the banned Muslim Brotherhood and of broadcasting misleading stories about Egypt. Several videos were played in court, but none from their channel. Bizarrely, the footage included a story on animal welfare by a rival network. The court was also shown material from Peter Gresta's laptop. There was a news conference from Kenya, a documentary he made in Somalia, and even some of his parents' holiday photographs. From inside his cage in court, he shouted that this so-called evidence was a complete joke. His brother Mike told us if it wasn't so serious, it would be hilarious. But the journalists have now spent over 100 days behind bars. He says that must be taking its toll on Peter.
I think it's going to be, the end result will be more of a mental strain that's being placed on him, and how he sort of comes out of that is difficult to know at this stage. But you know, spending 23 hours a day locked in a cell with two other colleagues for 7 days of the week is sort of torture in anyone's language, I think.
More than 3 months on, the journalists say the authorities have failed to produce a shred of evidence against them. Supporters believe they are prisoners of a show trial. Orla Guerin, BBC News, Cairo.
Thank you, Ms. Guerin. Friends, let's take a look now at our earthquake map and see what's happening in the last today, and then within the last couple of hours there have been at least 2 earthquakes above a magnitude of 5.0 in Nicaragua. About an hour ago there was a 6.1 quake, and friends, one of the prophecies of Jesus Christ as he explained to the disciples, we'll come back to this chart, we'll come back to this slide. Let's put our chart on the screen for just a moment. 4th column over, under the 4th column where we got the number 4 and the pale horse, there we also have 3 of the words Jesus Christ used in plain language. That was part of the answer to the disciples. What would be the sign of your second coming? Among other things they asked. But one of the answers he gave was loimos, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, as part of the 4th seal. He also said there would be seismus, there would be seismic conditions, seismic activity, commotions in the air such as gale force winds of all kinds, commotions on the ground such as earthquakes that would happen. He also said there would be tarake, trouble, not the major trouble of the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, the mega trouble, but trouble nonetheless. All of those part of the 4th seal, the pale horse, and these earthquakes that would happen in diverse places were one of the signs that would tell us that the second return of Jesus Christ was getting nigh. And so here on our chart today we've had numerous. These are the little dots you see, the little yellowish orange dots are earthquakes that have happened somewhere today. The one in red that you see, that's the 6.11 in Nicaragua, and then there's another one that was at least 5 points. 2 hours ago in Tonga, there was a 5.6 earthquake in the Tonga Islands region. And that's just a little update. We're going to try to do that every day, and I'm going to try to get a little more details for you each day on the earthquakes, because every day, friends, earthquakes happen around the world. So that prophecy of Jesus Christ, he didn't say what magnitude they had to be. He just said there would be earthquakes in diverse places. And, you look at this map, you look at the dots where earthquakes happen today, and then these are they got to be at least 2.5 to make these dots that we're showing you here. And this map is from various government sources. There were a lot of earthquakes in diverse places just in the past 24 hours. So that prophecy that relates to this chart, the fourth seal over, what Christ said there'd be earthquakes in diverse places, there'd be seismus, and not just earthquakes, but there'd be commotions in the air also, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, you name it, volcanic eruptions, you name it, anything that can happen on the ground, that's part of that fourth seal, that part of this thing of earthquakes. We watch and we know that we are in the last days today. All right, now let's go on to travels of the Duke and Duchess, Catherine and William, and how that relates to a certain, not a prophecy, but a certain passage of Scripture from 1 Samuel about the the royalty in England. And in this video, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge have paid their respects to New Zealand's war dead as their royal tour in Australia continues.
Your Royal Highnesses, please.
They're taking on a greater share of the workload of William's grandmother now, particularly the long-haul journeys like this one to New Zealand. So for William and Catherine, there are state receptions in their honour, speeches to be made, and jokes about George.
He's a bonny lad, and you'll be pleased to know that he's currently preparing for life as a prop forward.
The couple's first public engagement of the visit had been to pay tribute to New Zealand's war dead. The country placed itself immediately at Britain's side in 1914. 17,000 New Zealanders were killed in the First World War. In Blenheim on the South Island, William and Catherine stepped forward together to place a wreath at the town's war memorial. They met veterans. William took one group, Catherine another. Men with their memories of war, recalled slowly, listened to carefully. Hands were clasped and confidences shared. And then to the crowds, predominantly women, frequently mothers who'd brought their babies. A chance for Catherine to show off sharpened communication skills and to be reminded that babies don't necessarily regard meeting a duchess as a moment not to be sneezed at. There is a serious point, of course, amid all the royal visit frivolity. Does New Zealand want to keep Britain's kings or queens as their head of state?
New Zealand has certainly flirted with the idea of moving on from the monarchy in the past, but when you come out into small rural communities like this, support for the monarchy is still strong.
I think Will and Kate would just be wonderful one day to be the King and Queen. Be lovely.
Can you imagine a King George of New Zealand?
Absolutely. Why not? Absolutely.
Perfect. Fine on me. Start her up.
He and his son represent the long-term future of the monarchy, and at the moment there is no real evidence that New Zealand is pressing for a change. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, Blenheim.
And friends, after looking at that story, as I mentioned to you, we're going to take a look at, and by the way, if I said Australia at one point, we had just done another story a moment ago on Australia. The Duke and Duchess were in New Zealand, as you heard in the video. So I just wanted to make a correction there if I said that incorrectly earlier. I'm sorry for those of you in New Zealand. I didn't mean to call that Australia. But the royalty in the UK, how did that begin? Well, if we take a look at this scripture from 1 Samuel 8, beginning in verse 4, where the elders of ancient Israel came forward and asked Samuel, said to him, "Make us a king." Then all the elders of Israel, verse 4, gathered themselves together and came to Samuel unto Ramah, where he was, and said unto Samuel, "Behold, you are old, and your sons don't walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the nations." But the thing displeased Samuel, it says in verse 6, now I don't have verse 6 up here, but in verse 6 you would see, if we had it here, you'd see that it displeased Samuel. He went before God on it, and when they said, give us a king to judge us, and Samuel prayed unto the Lord, verse 6 says, and then here in verse 7, the Lord answered Samuel and said, hearken unto the voice of the people, Samuel, and all they say unto you, for they haven't rejected you. It's not you they're rejecting, but they've rejected me, that I should not reign over them. And the end result of that, friends, was, as you saw in the previous video there, the royalty now visiting New Zealand. That royalty, the beginning of that royalty was these verses in 1 Samuel 8, when the elders came before Samuel and said to him, behold, you're old, and your sons don't walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us, like all the nations. And again, the end result of that request was the royalty and the Queen of England and a potential new King George that we see in present-day news in out of the UK. Well, friends, we have a couple minutes. I got a light story we could end with, and a simple, very light story, and I think let's roll that one. A team of researchers in Mexico has warned that one of the country's top tourist attractions, the Pyramid of the Sun, could be slowly sinking into the ground.
Majestic, ancient, and full of mystery, pyramids are built to defy time. Up to a point. Scientists say the structure is at risk of gradually sinking into the ground. Its southern side is much drier than its northern part, and that doesn't bode well.
The southern part is less dense than the northern part due to a difference in humidity. In the end, that could, within that interpretation, make the southern area mechanically more fragile than the northern part.
The discovery came about while scientists were examining the internal cavities of the pyramid. They say part of the problem is due to the south side's intense exposure to the sun, as well as various restorations made to the pyramid over the years. They also point to the sheer number of tourists who climb up and down its steps in their thousands year after year. Scientists hope to have a possible solution to prevent the sinking effect once all the research is completed. Karenina Velandia, BBC News.
And friends, just a reminder that Thursday night, this is the end of our reports for the week. Our next Nightcast report would normally be Sunday night, but we're going to be off Sunday night. We'll also be off Monday night. God willing, we'll be back next Tuesday night with Nightcast. If for some reason we're not here, we'll try to give you Tuesday night. We'll try to give you a message as to why, but Sunday night is Passover night for myself and brethren in the church that I'm a long-time part of. And Monday night is a special annual night in our church. We will have on Sunday night the Passover foot washing ceremony service at 8 p.m. in each time zone in the continental United States, for those of you who want to join us online. That'll be on our Sabbath service channel. Maybe we'll also put that right here on this channel at 8 p.m. And that'll be 8 p.m. in each time zone. So something different for next week. It's an annual thing for us. Those of you who watch who not part of our church, well, just hang in there with us. We'll be back Tuesday night with our regular news report. Until then, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying thank you for joining me tonight. And until next time, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.